Legal and ethical aspects of prescribing. Introduction to the module. During this module, we will explore the law on prescribing in the United Kingdom healthcare system. To ensure you have a full view of the legal and ethical aspects of prescribing, this module explores topics such as law relating to prescribing, legal issues with non-medical prescribing, deciding the appropriate standard of care, patient autonomy, consent, and information sharing. Medical products and licensing. Legislation covering supply of medicines. Controlled drugs, CDs. Medicine supply. Prescription writing rules. Accountability. Clinical negligence. Ethical aspects. Law relating to prescribing. There are several laws that apply for health professionals prescribing medications. The two laws that are of particular interest in this case are the Medicines Act 1968, the Misuse of Drugs Act 1972. The Medicine Act 1968. The Medicine Act 1968 has several purposes: ensuring the quality, safety and efficacy of any medications marketed and sold in the United Kingdom, ensuring that the public is kept safe by regulating the public's access to potentially dangerous substances in the form of medication. The Misuse of Drugs Act 1972. With the Misuse of Drugs Act 1972, the emphasis lies on supply control. Here, the Act protects the public by restricting access to medications that are more likely to be abused or become a focus of addiction. Legal issues with non-medical prescribing. Prescribing medication will always be subject to legislation, and this is something prescribing nurses must be aware of. In the period of 2016 to 2017, a total of 1889 concerns were raised, and this led to the removal of 17 registrants from the General Pharmaceutical Council (GPHC) register. The issues in question related to unsafe practices, incorrect recording of received and dispensed medicine, and selling controlled medication for recreational use. Case Study 1. In April 2017, it was discovered that a nurse was running a cosmetic business aside from her regular job as a nurse. Within this setting, she acquired a blank signed prescription from a doctor at an anesthetics course. Then, she continued to photocopy the prescription and dispensed it at the NHS, costing the system £3,300. After reporting her actions, the nurse was prosecuted and received an 18-month suspension alongside 200 hours of community service. She was also struck off the NMC register after the council decided she endangered people's lives with her actions. On top of that, she was also convicted to 8 months in prison. Case Study 2. Nursing staff raised the alarm about a consultant cardiac care nurse specialist. This happened after several staff members were concerned about her erratic prescribing behavior. The nurse claimed she obtained her prescribing qualification at university, even though there was no record of her doing so. It turned out the nurse in question had no formal qualification. She was fired from her job and immediately reported to NMC. This caused her to be removed from the register permanently. Deciding the appropriate standard of care. The law states that a patient can seek a legal remedy when given, or not given, care is considered negligent and is causing considerable harm to the patient. This is also known under the name tort law, which is most often dealt with in civil court. Appropriate standard of care. Healthcare professionals must remember that to provide the appropriate standard of care, healthcare practitioners need to show they can deliver competent care in a safe setting. If these conditions are not met, they do not meet the standard of care and can be held responsible under the tort law. Patient autonomy, consent, and information sharing. To help understand the importance of patient autonomy, consent, and information sharing legislation, we take a look at the case of Mrs. Montgomery. This case study took place in 2015 in the case of Montgomery versus the Lanarkshire Health Board. Case study of Mrs. Montgomery. While expecting her first baby, Mrs. Montgomery fell under the responsibility of an obstetrics consultant. She suffered a number of health problems, including diabetes and a smaller pelvis. As a result, delivering the baby could prove more problematic. Overall, there was a 9 to 10% risk, given her health problems at the time. The consultant did not share that information with Mrs. Montgomery, mainly because she believed the risk was too small. However, the baby's delivery was impacted by Mrs. Montgomery's pre-existing health conditions, as the shoulder was impacted in the pelvis during delivery, which led to oxygen deprivation. Because of the difficult birth, the baby suffered severe disabilities. The case was taken to court, and Mrs. Montgomery was awarded £5.2 million. What this means for health professionals. Medical and non-medical professionals have a responsibility towards their employer to explain their conduct and behavior. Patient autonomy must be respected at all times. Information must be provided to patients regarding the risks and benefits of treatments. Health professionals must show a good understanding of the legislation as well as the expectations of their employer to ensure safe practice and good interaction with clients. Medical products and licensing. The importance of medical licensing is: MA holder is liable for adverse effects of medicine on the patient. Therefore, medical licensing is important for the protection of both patient and healthcare professional. Good overview of medicines and their marketed effects can prevent adverse reactions, and the MA holder being held liable. Legislation covering supply of medicines. There are 3 distinct categories of medicines under the current UK Medicines Act. Each of these has a specific purpose, legally speaking. General Sales List, GSL. Medicines without sale restriction. They must be sold in original manufacturer packaging. There might be a limit on pack size. Sales must take place on permanent premises. Pharmacy medicines, P. Medicines that can only be sold by a registered pharmacy. This must fall under the supervision of a registered pharmacist. This category usually has little effect on non-medical prescribers, but is important, nonetheless. Prescription-only medicines, POM. Medicines that can only be provided by an appropriate practitioner. Appropriate practitioners include doctors, dentists, veterinarians, community practitioner nurse prescribers, nurse independent prescribers, pharmacist independent prescribers, Supplementary prescribers. Controlled drugs, CDS. Controlled drugs fall under the Misuse of Drugs Act, and possession is illegal unless exempt by a legislative act. They are divided into Class A, B and C. Controlled drugs schedules are especially important for prescribers. These are the controlled drugs that can be used by law for medical purposes, but still need to be controlled. Controlled drugs schedules. The controlled drugs schedules are: Schedule 1. Drugs with no therapeutic benefit, but licensed for research. Current examples are cannabis or LSD. A special home office license must be held in order to prescribe, possess, or supply. Schedule 2. Envelops opiates and stimulants. Good examples include diamorphine, methadone, and amphetamine. Schedule 3. Drugs considered less prone to abuse than those in Schedule 2, including temazepam and buprenorphine. Abuse of these substances is also seen as less harmful. Schedule 4. Benzodiazepines and anabolic steroids. Schedule 5. Preparations that may contain controlled drugs, but in a lower concentration or strength. As a result, they can be exempt from POM control and are therefore classed as P medicine. No additional control is required. Medicine supply. The different types of medicine supply include: group directions. This allows a larger number of health professionals to prescribe POMIS to groups of patients. For example, providing a flu vaccine. It usually requires patients requiring similar treatments to be grouped together. Emergency supply provisions. A community pharmacist can provide POMIS, this in case of an emergency on the part of the patient or at the request of the doctor. This entails an emergency supply and not the full dose. Signed order. POMIS, purchased by doctors and dentists from their community pharmacists, which are then used in their clinic or practice. These medicines can also be carried by these health professionals for emergency use. Standing order. The acquisition of a supply of medicine to supply a clinic or a hospital. Prescription writing rules. These details must be present on each prescription for it to be considered legal. Written signature from the prescriber. Other parts can be done digitally. Practice address of the prescriber. Date when the prescription was written. POMIS prescriptions are automatically valid for 6 months. Details on the appropriate status of the practitioner. Printed details. Patient age if under 12 years of age. Quantity supplied. Form of medicine. Medicine strength. Medicine dose. Limited validity. Controlled drugs cannot exceed a 30-day supply. Permission or no permission for a repeat prescription. Private prescriber ID number. Private prescription for controlled drugs must be written on an official form. Accountability and clinical negligence. Non-medical prescribers can be held liable for illegal and inappropriate prescribing. This liability could be on a personal level if you fail to meet the requirements of your employer and the law. All non-medical prescribers are also subject to professional regulatory bodies, which can hold you accountable. Clinical negligence will occur when the 3 following principles are met. A healthcare professional had a duty of care to the patient. There was a breach in the duty of care by acting or failure to act. The breach caused harm to the patient. Ethical aspects. There are some ethical aspects all health practitioners must keep in mind when prescribing. These ethical aspects include: patients must have the competence to use and process the information required to decide. Patient must not be under duress, coercion, or pressure to provide consent. The patient must receive enough information in a way that they can understand and which enables them to decide. Summary. In this module, you have learnt: the Medicines Act 1968 and Misuse of Drugs Act 1972 contain all legislation about prescribing. Health practitioners must provide competent care in a safe setting. The three categories of medicines are general sales list, pharmacy medicines, and prescription-only medicines. There are 5 controlled drugs schedules. Some require a special license to be prescribed. Medicine supply options include group direction, emergency supply provisions, signed order, and standing order. Non-medical prescribers can be held personally accountable for not meeting legal requirements for prescribing.